Good day to you, Lates and Jims. In this video today, we are going to make this coffee bag from start to finish, including dimensions and tips and tricks. I'm Ryan from Woodlander North, and this is Deepwood Handcraft. In the description, I will list a table of contents, so you can skip ahead if you want. Today we're making the small coffee bag. I have included all the measurements for the 3 different sizes, small, medium, and large. If you want to make any of the other 2 sizes, same method, just different measurements. Also, I will provide links for all the tools that I'm using. If you want to click on those links and buy those tools from Amazon, from my links, I'll get a little bit of kickback, and that's a good thing. I'm using the same tools that I've been using since the very beginning. They're just the cheap and dirty version. You don't need anything special. You can improvise, use what you got. If you would like to support the channel, see more content like this, if you find it valuable and it helps you out, there is also a link in the description to donate. These planes fly over my cabin day and night, well, mainly just day, but still. And lastly, in the description, I have provided links for Etsy. The plans for the stuff that's just written out is free. You can download those as a PDF off of Etsy. If you want the templates, I have also included those on Etsy. They're going to cost you probably 10 bucks. I don't know. 3 sizes, 10 bucks, all the templates for the coffee bags. So one last thing before we get into it. This is a coffee bag. That's just what it's called. That's the style of bag from the Sami reindeer herders in Scandinavia. They would carry their coffee on bags similar to this. It's not a direct copy. It's just my take on the Sami coffee bag. This is Kodiak hide. If you're planning to actually carry your coffee in it, I would recommend using some kind of leather that has not been tanned with chemicals to get onto your beans, or carry your coffee in some other kind of bag inside of this bag. The Sami tan their hides from birch bark and reindeer, and so that's much more appropriate for carrying foodstuffs in uncovered. By anything else, that's just the style of the bag. This is for hanging it off of stuff. You can wrap it around your belt, tie it to a D-ring on your pack or your haversack, or around the shoulder strap of your thing, or whatever you want to do. This is just an extra bit of lace for hanging the bag. It's got a draw string thing. Lace on this is a little long with an antler toggle. You don't have to use the antler toggle. You can just use the drawstring and tie it. If you don't have an antler toggle, you don't have to use antler. You can use wood or a penny with a hole drilled in it, whatever you want to do there. This top section is pretty much just to give it the draw section. Bottom thing would be what you actually put your stuff in. So that's what we're doing. 3 different sizes. This is my first tutorial, so I probably did a bunch of stuff unnecessarily. I'm not gonna really know what you guys prefer unless you tell me in the comments. Parts that are too long, did I leave something out? Bunch of unnecessary stuff in there you don't really care to see. Also, video that I just uploaded before this one that you're watching right now is how to use this lace cutter tool to cut your own lace out of this kind of hide. I cut this lace. I cut all my lace. I'll show you how to use it. It's very easy. This is cheap, super efficient. Use all your scraps, make lace. Check that video out. All right, these are working man's hands. They're not dirty, they're just stained. I've been skidding logs all week, so that's what it is. You need some measuring implements. You definitely need a square. I like to use a ruler separately. You need to have some marking implements. I like to use a Sharpie marker for the lace holes, something to cut with. These are 4mm stitching chisels. They give a 1/4 inch stitch, 5 30-second hole punch for the lace holes, gives a nice tight fit for the lace. I use artificial sinew on almost everything that I make. I use the larger size harness needles that I get from Tandy. They don't break as easy as the smaller size. 4 panels per coffee bag. You need 2 of these side gusset panels, 1 of these body panels, and 1 of these top drawstring panels. The side gusset is 2 inches wide by 5.5 inches tall for the small coffee bag. All of my seams are a 1/4 inch from the edge, and the stitches are a 1/4 inch apart on center. I mark for the 6-prong stitching chisel, and that is 1 1/4 inch for hanging your teeth to punch the next hole. It just makes it easier. The body is 12 inches tall by 4.5 inches wide. If you're using the templates, be sure to only mark those lace holes on the back side. The templates are half panels, so you got to flip it over to mark the front half. Be sure to only mark the lace holes on one side. The hanging lace holes are 7/8 of an inch from the top and 1 3/4 from the side, and they're all 1 inch apart. So that's both sides, 1 3/4 from each side. And you don't have to mark these holes either if you don't want that extra bit of lace that's hanging from the back of the bag. Top drawstring panel is 11.5 inches wide by 3 3/4 inches tall. This fold over top part is 1/4 inch and then 1/2 inch for the two different lines going across the top of that. You fold that over and sew it. You can see there, that's 1/2 inch from the top line, 3/4 inch from the top edge. There's 12 drawstring lace holes going across the top. They are 1 1/4 inch down from the top edge, 1/2 inch from that bottom line. That just becomes the line when you fold it over and sew it. The reason there's 12 is it has to be multiples of 4, otherwise your lace won't come out of the holes that you want them to come out of, basically. You should pause this if you want to see the measurements real clearly. Typically they're 1 inch apart, but to get the 12 holes, sometimes the first and second hole are a different measurement, so pay close attention to that. You want 12 holes total. For the medium coffee bag, the side gusset is 7 inches tall and 2 1/4 inches wide. Body is 15 1/4 inches tall by 5.5 inches wide. And the hanging lace holes are further from the edge on this one. They're 2 1/4 inch from the side edge. They're still 1 inch apart and still 7/8 from the top edge on all of the bags. Top drawstring panel is 14 inches wide by 3 3/4 inches tall. The top finished edge is exactly the same, but you want to pay attention to the measurements on the 12 drawstring lace holes on the medium bag. The hanging lace holes are these two little deals down here, and they're 7/8 from the edge always, and always 1 7/8 and 7/8 from the bottom edge. The large coffee bag side panel they are 8 inches tall by 2.5 inches wide, always 1/4 inch seam, always 1/4 inch stitch. The top drawstring panel on this one, the fold over edge is the same. The lace holes for the drawstring are 16 holes on the large coffee bag, so pay attention to those measurements also, because they're a little different. They're still 1 inch apart on the main amount of holes, but on the edges it gets a little tricky sometimes, just to maintain that multiples of 4. The hanging lace holes are always the same. They're 7/8 inch from the bottom edge and then 1 7/8 because they're 1 inch apart, and they're 7/8 from the edge. And that just matches them up real good with the body panel after the stitching is done. And the body panel on the large coffee bag is 17.5 inches tall by 6.5 inches wide. And the lace holes are kind of always centered in the coffee bags regardless of what size it is. And they're always 1 inch apart by 1 inch apart. So from the edge on the large bag it is 2 3/4 from the side edge. It's always 7/8 of an inch from the top edge. They're always 1 inch apart by 1 inch apart. Now when you're looking at your leather, assuming that you don't know much about it, You always want it to be a nice tight grain on the back side and the top side. The fuzziness of it will tell you. And also sometimes you get into this really smooth grain, maybe there'll be some kind of pock marks in it or whatever. That's no good in my opinion. That fuzzy stuff on the back is terrible, makes terrible leather. If you gotta hide it at the bottom of your bag, that's okay. But you start getting into weak leather at that point. I always start with the square, even if it's gonna have rounded edges. You gotta have a nice square start to the project. I like to mark, while I'm marking the outside edge, I also put the 1/4 inch mark for where my stitches are going to be. That way it's faster when I go to mark my stitch lines. And then I use my awl to mark where the stitching prong is actually going to go, so that it has a nice little divot to sit in. And also there's no marks on the leather after I cut it out. Using a template is much easier. You just trace around the thing basically and all your holes are marked. Just use the awl to mark where the stitching chisel is going to go. This is how I hold my shears. I don't put my fingers inside that loop. It gives you a lot stronger leverage. If you're cutting with shears, make sure your leather goes over the top on the one side and completely under the shears on the other. Otherwise your line's going to be a little bit crooked. I see a lot of people using X-Acto knives and utility knives. I've never been able to get that to work for me. My hands are a little too shaky. Maybe I drink too much coffee or something. When you're marking this stuff out with templates, be for sure what's your stitching lines and what are your lace holes. Because if you mark it all with the same thing, it's real easy once you get over to the punching board to punch the wrong thing with the wrong thing. So if you just pay attention, and I've done it a bunch of times the wrong way, if you just pay attention what are your lace holes versus what are your stitch holes. That's why I use the Sharpie marker versus the awl on the lace hole, so I can clearly see and don't punch the wrong thing. Now I'm not real sure why I put this clip in here like this, but that's going to fold over and sew to itself, and then it's going to sew on top of that so that those lace holes line up. But you'll see that later on in the video. I'll show you exactly how to do that so it comes out right. Now whenever you're marking your stuff out, it's good to give yourself, I like to give myself at least 1/8 of an inch on the edge of whatever leather I'm marking out on. And that's because when you go to cut that, if you haven't given yourself enough room, cutting it's going to be real hard. Which isn't a big deal if you're doing a hidden seam thing where the seam is on the inside, but if the seam is not hidden and it's on the outside, it's going to be a problem. So give yourself a little bit of material to cut off when you're marking your stuff. And also, if you're not using stitching chisels, find a fork that matches your measurements that you need. Or if you're doing it by hand, just be sure to count your stitches. So long as all your stitches count out the same on your stuff, it'll all come together right. Right here we have an earthquake. It's okay. It's okay. It's a fairly common occurrence. Still going. They used to scare the crap out of me, I'm not gonna lie. So here we'll mark more stuff out. Like I said, you don't have to use stitching chisels. If you're punching everything with an awl, you can use a fork to mark where your holes are gonna go, or one of those wheelie deals. I like to do everything on a 1/4 inch because it makes it easy for the measurements, but so long as your holes count the same, it's not that big a deal. And if you're measuring in millimeters versus inches, then just do multiples of 4 for this exact kind of thing, or multiples of something so that you know that it's all going to come out the same. Otherwise, there's probably better ways of doing it. I just don't know them because this is what I've done. And this was the easy thing for me, so that's what I did. And that's what I do, because it's easy. And if you're using a Sharpie to mark your lace holes, you better be sure to punch that whole thing off. Now here's the thing I do where I cut the corners off. Just a 1/4 inch by a 1/4 inch, just the quarter on that first stitch. And that makes your seams come together much better. On that top folded over edge, I do a 1/2 inch down, so that when it folds over, the line that is left on your edge there matches the folded over top edge, but I still do a 1/4 inch on the bottom. You can see here. Now I do this, otherwise your seams bunch up terribly, and so you can see I've done it on every bit of this stuff. And now I open off everything, and I'm not using upholstery leather, so this oil tan Kodiak hide that I'm using takes the oil or the heavy duty LP, and I like Obenovs above everything else because it's non-toxic and it's been proven scientifically to work. And I'm sponsored by Obenov now, so just so you know, I'm sponsored by that. So it doesn't really matter where you start necessarily here, but I like to go ahead and do the top drawstring panel first, and I'll just fold that top lip over and sew it first, and then sew it to itself on the sides there so it's ready to go. And then after that I will do the body. I use a saddle stitch for everything that I do, always and ever, because it's superior to a lock stitch. But if a lock stitch is all you can do and you've got one of those self-sewing all deals that they sell, whatever gets it done. I like to backstitch 3 times on the start, and then I'll backstitch 7 times on the end there. And I don't tie any special knots or anything, I just clip it off like a 1/4 inch long tail, maybe slightly less, and then I'll burn that thing. You gotta be real careful. You can see the breeze coming in my window here, messing my lighter all up. Don't burn your leather, but if you're real careful, you can just get that seam or that thread burning, and then it'll melt itself down and you can just smash it flat. Careful not to touch your thumb to it while it's still too hot, otherwise it'll melt onto your skin because it's polyester. And then I'll stretch the seam out a little bit, flatten it all out, kind of even it out, and then it's ready to sew to itself. This is a little trick I learned from The Art of Hand Sewing by Al Stolman, where you pierce your thread and then thread your needle. And if you're having problems with your needle slipping off the end of your thread, if you do this, that'll stave off that problem very well. Now when you're sewing stuff with hidden seam, you always do finished edge to finished edge, so that way when you flip it inside out, the seam will be on the inside. Here I gave myself a little boo-boo with my needle, which happens often. I got cuts all over my hands from sewing. The thread will cut you too. I used to tie knots on my thread, and now I don't. I just melt it and smash it flat, and good luck getting that thing off there unless you really want to. So now that part's done, flip it inside out. I like to really work my seams after the fact. And now I'm ready to sew. You gotta make sure that part lines up into the body so you don't have the side panel hanging out of the body. It's all got to be together, finished side to finished side. When you go to turn the corner, you're going to make sure to wrap that stitch around that little cutout, because there used to be a hole there, remember? So it looks like that. And then you just manipulate the back so that it wraps up around to turn the corner, because that's going to start taking shape now. So as you turn that corner, that gap closes up completely where you cut that corner out of the side gusset panel, because that spot there counts as a hole, and as you keep going, the body really starts to take shape there. There's no gaps any longer. So you can see here when it's sewn all the way through, it's got shape now. And now I'm eating because I'm a human. So when you go to put that top drawstring panel inside to sew it all together, you put the top first inside the bag, and it's already turned right side out. Because remember, if you're doing hidden seams, it's finished edge to finished edge. So top down inside with the finished edge turned out so that they match touching on the inside. And then the way the stitches line up, there is a middle stitch hole that'll line up with that gap. That middle stitch hole right there between the 2 lace holes. That's where you start your stitch, and it doesn't matter what direction you go in. but that middle stitch hole lines up with the gap between the two edges where you cut the corners out, and you just wrap it over one side so the middle stitch hole comes over the edge, and then you just continue it around, remembering that anywhere you've cut your corners there and your seams meet together, that counts as a hole. So whenever you come to that hole on the body part, you wrap around an edge on the top drawstring panel, and you just go all the way around. If you have any questions about that, woodlandernorth@gmail.com. And now when it comes to turning the thing inside out, that's a bit of work. You gotta be careful your fingernails don't scratch up the top grain of the finished side of your leather. You just work that thing until it comes right side out. And then I always work my seams really well so that they're nice and crisp and sharp on the outside. You can see here I'm pointing my finger through on the seam itself and pushing it out so that it comes out nice and clean on the outside. And don't be afraid to push that thing. I don't glue my seams, but if you've done it right, your sinew should hold those seams really well. You're not going to break that if you're using quality leather. And then I'll stretch them out a little bit so that the leather stretches out over top of what I've stitched. I'll roll the seams on my fingers a little bit and kind of sharpen them up, because you want your seams to look good. If it's all bunched up and nasty looking, it's not going to look right, in my opinion. So I'll stretch that stuff out, make it look good. You've already done this much work, you might as well keep going. So this is what it looks like when it's done. Seams are all crisp and clean. The lace holes all line up in the back. Seams all look good. Now I'm going to eat a chip. I'm not sure why I left the volume up on this one. ASMR, I guess. I just measure my lace out with my eyeball. You need to leave enough so that it's going to give a bit to tie over, because that's the hanging lace. Hang it off your belt or whatever. And then this is the most important part of your lace after you've cut it, is the Ovenoff Heavy Duty LP. And my wife is coughing there. I like full coverage on my lace with the Heavy Duty LP. If you're going to protect your leather, might as well protect your lace too. I don't see why not. And she's watching some kind of dumb show in the background there, so you can probably hear that. So now the friction from doing this will work it into the leather. And then I'll wipe the excess off with a rag. That way it doesn't bloom and turn white in the nooks and crannies of the top grain. You see my guitar in the background. I did all the music for this video in GarageBand on my iPhone. Along with the whole video, it's all done on my iPhone, including this overdubbing that I did in GarageBand on my iPhone. So when you go to do your lace, I like to start in the back on one side and make sure it's all evened up in the front before you pull it all the way through. That way you don't have to undo the lace to redo the lace like I just did. Put your whatever you're going to use if you're going to use a toggle. This is the most important part, in my opinion, of your lace, past cutting and protecting. When you're tying your knots, the top grain should always be up. And it's not real hard to do. It doesn't take a lot of time, just to make sure the top grain is up and it's not twisted inside your knot. And I just cut it off about 1/4 inch at like a 45. You can do what you want there, but the top grain being up on your knot makes all the difference, in my opinion. I'm forever seeing people tying their knots with twisted lace and the flesh side showing through on their knots. It just looks sloppy, in my opinion. You've already done this much work. Might as well do it right. When you go to do this part, if you'll get them both through at the same time, that way you can even it up just right, like I'm about to do right here. That way I know it's even. And then I'll do one side at a time. That way it always crosses over it at the same place so it looks even and consistent. And as I'm twisting this through, it's about how much you want to have in your fingers to find that knot blindly. I make sure that the top lace is showing both on the inside and the outside, because that lace is spiraling through there, so that the top grain is always showing up. And it just looks so much cleaner in my opinion. It doesn't take that much longer to make sure that it's looking that way. Same with this knot. I like to put that through the top drawstring lace just to kind of make it look tight at the top. Top lace or top grain is always showing up, so it looks clean and consistent. Same with this knot right here. Just take a little bit of extra time. It's not hard, it doesn't take a bunch of time. You've already done all this much work. A little extra care here will make sure that your knots come out clean looking. And I'm pinching those between my forefinger and my thumb just to make sure it's even so I don't have to readjust it after I'm done. And that knot looks clean. Top grain showing all the way around. And that's it. When you tie this knot, you don't want to tie a square knot. In my opinion, you want to put like at least a half loop in there. You can do like you're tying your shoes otherwise, but if not, it'll be a lot to get it undone. All right, hope you enjoyed that. Hope it was useful to you. If not, you can tell me why. Anything you would like to see differently, you can tell me why. There's lots of mosquitoes out here, so I'm gonna go in the cabin where there's slightly less mosquitoes. That's it for me. Have a good day.